much is your homework today? I'm Peter.
And then I need Jamie Farr.
Everybody's got titles. I like that. Does the money come with that, or they reduce the money as soon as they give you the title? The higher, the bigger the title.
Is next on BCTV.
Good morning. We all know that the Canadian High Commission office in London has been penetrated by moles and telephone tappers. I'm talking about Jeannie Wadd's concern about the French, the Americans, and the British listening in on our great constitutional crisis. This morning, with Roy Romano, the Attorney General of Saskatchewan, the province led by Blakeney, the man who stands firm against Trudeau, we're going to find out jocularly if he thinks that Pierre's moles bug the capital in Saskatchewan. Mr. Romanow and I, however, will have a straight-up, hardline chat on Saskatchewan's position on our constitutional crisis. And from there, we're going to see one of my friends this morning, a fella called Frank Sweeney. Sweeney Cooperage, a famous British Columbia family. Look at the family. Look at it. In 1972, they took a Christmas card of the family all in one place in Vancouver. And now the last of the Sweeneys is being booted out, more or less, of his historical cooperage underneath Cambie Street Bridge to make way for what? A damned football stadium, the biggest in the world. Wait till you hear what Sweeney says about that and about Steve Rogers and his hot tubs. That's a local joke. And then a serious bit with Donald Savage, the executive secretary of a very powerful group, the Canadian Association of University Teachers. We're very much concerned that the federal government is going to put the butts to money for higher education, post-secondary education in this country. But to begin with, an international institution by the name of Corporal Klinger. Where are you, Corporal Klinger?
I'm right here, Jack.
No, there you are, there on the monitor, Corporal
right.
Klinger.
I don't want to take a look. You haven't got a profile shot, have you?
No, straight on.
Straight on?
With your three-string pedals. And
Hello,
it's Jamie Farr, who's here to perform and to plug, along with me this morning, the Variety Club Telethon. And we'll have a giggle with Jamie, who'll tell us all the secret sex life of Hot Lips and dear old Harry Morgan.
That's dull. You don't want to hear that, Jack.
It can't be
Harry
dull.
Morgan's not dull. Now, Hot Lips' sex life is.
After the break. It's around again, come Saturday and Sunday. 21 continuous hours of broadcasting from the Queen Elizabeth Theatre throughout BC and the Yukon via BCTV network. It's the Variety Club Telethon. And the star of the Variety Club Telethon is that wonderful character with the biggest nose in the world, Jamie Farr.
You're complimentary, both on the fact that I have the biggest nose in the world and also that I'm the star of the telethon. I'm not the star of the telethon.
One of the stars?
One of the stars of the telethon. Actually, the public is the star of the telethon because they're going to be donating their money to it.
Well, like everybody else in the world, I suppose I'm a M.A.S.H addict.
I know. Isn't that great? That's what keeps us on the air.
I miss Radar.
You, don't say that to me. I took his place. Say that to somebody else. I'm sorry Radar left, but look what it's done for me.
No,
Got me out of dresses, a bigger salary.
Not all the time. Last night you were wearing a fatigue uniform where you had a nut with a hole in his sock.
Oh, that's a rerun. Yeah, that's
A real
syndication.
Section 8.
Yeah, Boots Miller, right.
Tell me, are you really a Section 8? I mean, have the problems overtaken your real life personality?
Jack, I think anybody in show business is a Section 8. You have to be crazy, right? That's the prerequisite to get into this business. You're not a sane man. I just heard your opening in there. I got to see the rest of this show. What's the gentleman's name?
Roy Romano.
Yeah. You going to really bite into
No,
him?
he's not a Russian prince. He's a socialist politician from Saskatchewan. He's really quite funny. Let's go down the cast, though. Hot Lips is magnificent.
Yes, Loretta Swit is a terrific lady. And do you know something? This past year was the first year that she has won an Emmy after 9 years of being on that show, and Harry Morgan won an Emmy. A lot of people think that our show has won an awful lot of awards, and it hasn't. It's won very few Emmy awards. Mainly it's won it in writing, and it's won it in directing. Alan's, I think, only won it once. Loretta's won it once, Gary's won it once, and Harry's won it once.
The guy I hated, I know he's gone.
Yeah, Larry
now.
Linville. Everybody hated him.
Was he the same off-screen as
No,
on-screen?
he was a delightful man who finally had to leave the show because the character was getting so under his skin that he couldn't stand being around himself, and he had to leave.
We're talking, of course, Larry was Hot Lips' boyfriend.
Yeah, Major Burns.
The little struggles in the tent every now and again.
That's right, yeah. You know,
It's a dirty show.
it is not a dirty
sexy
show. We
show.
vacuum that set every day. No, it's a wonderful show, and we appreciate the fact that all the audiences continue to watch it. It's on, what, 3 or 4 times a day?
You can't miss the damn thing.
I know. What am I doing here? I have all this money. I don't need this. I'm going home, back to Los Angeles.
Just a minute. What time did you get up this morning to do this?
I got up at 7 o'clock this morning, was watching AM America. Is that all right to say that?
Don't give it down.
Yeah, you don't care about it? And I was watching about the fire that happened at the Hilton in Las Vegas. And as soon as I did that, I ran out, opened my door, checked where the fire exit was, got my towels ready in case a
Never
fire
sleep
broke
above
out.
the 3rd floor.
That's where I am, the 3rd floor.
So you
You're
can
absolutely
hold your
right.
breath and run
You
downstairs.
darn betcha.
Anyway, Radar's gone, but you're doing the company clerk. You're still wearing dresses, though.
No, on occasion I only at home, not on the show.
Do
I
you
only
pick
wear
your
the
own?
dresses at home.
Do you pick your own?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. You know, our producer, Burt Metcalf, is a Canadian. He was born in Montreal, was raised in Saskatchewan, where the gentleman, was it Romanoff? Romano. And anyway, Bert and I were discussing some wardrobe one day, and he says, could you believe this? 2 grown men discussing what kind of high heels you should be wearing, polissoirs or leather, or what kind of a hat, or what kind of earrings goes with this. He says, nobody would believe it.
The incredible thing about M.A.S.H. is the way it changes pace.
Yes.
Suddenly you'll all be teary and dramatic, and it's a dreadful war. And you seem to do it with such panache, it's unbelievable.
That's good. Panache on M.A.S.H. I like that, Jack.
M.A.S.H. is panache.
Yes, that's
Let's go
good.
down the characters again. Now, Morgan, when he stepped in after McLean Stevenson, did you think he'd flop?
No, I didn't think he'd flop. I've known Harry for many, many years. And you know what his real name is? Henry Bratsberg. His family background is Norwegian. And Harry wanted to change his name to Henry Morgan. But he couldn't do that because there was a Henry Morgan who was in show business, a
Right,
comedian.
remember, the old comedian.
That's right.
Looked
So-
unlike yourself.
That's right.
Big conch.
No, he didn't. Henry Morgan had a small schnoz compared to mine. At any rate...
Doesn't everybody?
Yes, that's right. I may take a deep breath and... no, you're supposed to say, if I do this, you say, wait a minute, save some for me.
I'll tell you what we're going to do, Jamie.
What happened to Harry Morgan? I thought we moving on. You want to
minute.
get to something funny? I know the
Give him
gentleman
that
from
profile
Saskatchewan.
shot. Give him that profile shot again. Give him that profile shot.
Where?
again.
How do?
No,
Which
you
way?
can.
This?
No.
That
Tell me
which way?
face the
Ah,
other.
that way. Tune in, and people think they're watching an anteater.
We've got a 47-second clip, which we're going to show now. 10 seconds from now, I suppose. And you can, I think there's sound up on the clip.
Okay,
We're in a
I'll-
bit of a rush this morning.
I understand. I
And
was
the
rushed
tears
here at 8
the
o'clock.
tears will run down your face with nostalgia as you watch this. How long has Henry been on the show?
Oh, Harry's been on it.
Harry.
Yeah, that's right. He's been on for 5 years. You have a moment for a very fast story?
Sure.
I'll condense it. Harry was doing a movie with Jimmy Stewart called The Far Country. It was being shot in Canada. And there's a scene at the end of the movie. Harry's a bad guy in the picture, and he's got 2 other bad guys. They're in the saloon, and Jimmy Stewart's coming down the street with a rifle and the townspeople behind him. And he says, okay, you either got to shoot it out with us or ride out of town. So Harry comes out and he says, well, we can't fight the whole town. We better ride out. So he starts to get on his horse with the other 2 bad guys, and the other 2 guys get on their horses first, and they ride off, and Harry's still trying to get into the thing. So the director says, cut. Listen, Harry, we've got to get this shot. We're losing the light. Yeah, we'll get it. So they go back. Jimmy Stewart, the townspeople going down the street. Okay, you can fight us or you can ride out of town. Harry comes out and says, well, we can't fight the whole town. Let's ride out. So Harry starts to get on his horse again. The other two guys get on their horse. Harry's foot gets caught in the stirrup, and he can't get onto the horse real fast. The other two guys ride out. The director says, cut. You all have to ride out at the same time, Harry. We're losing the light. Let's do this scene and get it right. Yes, okay, Mr. Man. Go back, Jimmy Stewart down the street with the townspeople behind him. Everybody's screaming and shouting, you can fight us or you can ride out of town. Harry comes out and says, well, we can't fight the whole town. Let's ride out. So he starts to get on the horse again, and the darn saddle switches on him, and it falls off the horse. The two guys get on the horse to start to ride out, and Harry goes, to hell with it. Let's fight him.
Listen, you're going to pull a little gimmick with phone calls after this, are you not?
Yeah, sure. You want? We'll tell them about it after you do whatever you have to do.
Put up the phone numbers, and we'll have another 8 minutes with Jamie Farr, Corporal Klinger. Magnificent nose. After the break. Come Saturday and Sunday at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, the telethon again. Up to now, more than $8 million has been raised by and for the variety clubs. Now, Jamie Farr, who is one of the stars
Thank you, Jay.
in the 21-hour continuous broadcast, has got a good idea to raise money on the Webster show right now. What is it, Jamie?
What we're going to do, and I'll hold this up for your cameraman. He can handle this, can he? A close up on this M.A.S.H. script.
Give him numbers.
All right, we're gonna. He can't count that high. I saw his salary. Any rate, what we'll do is when the people call in, anyone who comes up with the highest bid, I'll autograph this. I'll personalize this to that person, and we'll give them this script. And you will have the honor of collecting the first dollars for the telethon.
Highest bid on the phone right now in the next 8 or 9 minutes for an original autographed script of M.A.S.H. not yet in.
That's correct.
Autographed by Corporal Klinger, alias Jamie Farr.
Right.
A.K.A. Jamie Farr.
Yes, sir.
Now, we're giving the people a chance to do that. Gladys, where am I going to go? We just put up the numbers. Did you hear the bid? Did you hear the offer? Do you have a bid? Where are you?
Talking to Claude Rains.
What's wrong here this morning?
They didn't pay their bill.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, are you prepared to bid for this script? No, you're not.
He must be in politics. He doesn't have any money either.
Take the next call. Are you prepared to bid something for a M.A.S.H. script? What the hell's going on this morning?
I'll tell you what, let me call in and I'll start the first bid. How's that? What's your number?
We threw it at them too quickly this morning.
That's too fast. All right, let him ask us a question.
Are you there now? Gladys, frantic. Are you there? Yeah, what do you want to talk about?
Hello, Jack.
Are you there?
This was a great idea, wasn't it, Jack?
We pulled on them too quickly. People wanted to phone up and chat, and all of a sudden...
They heard money and they passed out, right?
Two Scotchmen here are putting the arm on them. We'll try again. Do you understand what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, what do you bid for him?
I didn't want to bid. I just wanted to ask him a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I was wondering, how long have you been doing the show? And I was wondering if I could ever see you in Hollywood.
I've been doing this show for 9 years, and sure, you can see us in Hollywood. You know, a lot of times, if you happen to know somebody at the studio, you call the studio, and they'll take a tour through...
I really admire your show, and I admire you for your big nose.
Well, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. We'll try this one.
Yes, all right.
I knew it was a mistake. Go ahead, please. Hello. Gladys, what is wrong with people this morning? Are you there? Is there something wrong with the phones this morning?
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, sweet lady.
Yeah.
Go
Now,
ahead.
who have I got?
You got Jamie and Jack.
Oh, hi. Jamie and Jack Webster?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you can hear
Yes,
me.
we're married now, so we've taken on the name. All right, go. You
But
got
anyway,
Not without your pearls.
Linnea.
What did she say?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
I admire the program, M.A.S.H., and I thought I'd start the bidding low on
How much?
the script.
How much?
Well, let's start it at $5. I know that's
$5,
low, but
okay.
then
Wait,
maybe
wait,
if
wait,
keep
don't- we
bidding
gotta
it,
get her
then we'll
name,
get it
though,
higher and
right,
higher,
Jack?
And then people put in
I'm going to put
more
her on
bids.
hold.
Oh, put her on hold. That's a good idea.
$5 bid.
$5.
$5 bid. Hold on for the moment. Is there a bid here? Is there a bid here?
I'll give you $5. I'll give you $10 for the script.
Well, I can
How's
make
that?
it 20, but that's not the name of the game, is it?
No.
Are you there?
Good morning.
Yes.
Hi, I'd like to ask you a question. I was wondering if you were ever going to direct a show.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I am this season. We have about 6 shows left, and the producers promised me that probably the last show of this season I will direct one. Did you want to be in it?
Because I see all over that Alan Alda is doing all the directing and all that. I was just wondering if you were going to be doing some of the directing.
Yeah, Mike Farrell has directed. As a matter of fact, Mike Farrell has been nominated by the Directors Guild for the show he did at Christmas time.
I was also wondering if you were ever going to write one of the scripts.
No. I used to write some shows, but I'll tell you, it's too hard. I don't dare want to do that. Why don't you bid $6 for this script?
Jimmy, hold your breath.
All right. No, you don't want me to do that.
Listen, I'm gonna shock myself beyond belief.
What are you going to do?
We have a problem on the line this morning. Might as well
Okay.
face up to it. The feed is so faint they can't hear it.
Okay.
So, even though it goes totally against the
Yes.
grain.
All right. Here he goes. This is a first on television. I want to see a replay of this tomorrow on your show.
As far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
it's the first time in history.
All right, man. What you
I'll
going
give
to
you
do?
$100.
$100? You got it. You got it. And Jack, that means you've
Use
got
a
the
black
first.
pencil.
That means you've given the first money to the telethon. That is incredible.
You've no idea how incredible it is.
Is that cash or a check?
Matter of fact, I could do something quite dramatic, couldn't I?
What are you going to do? Oh, right on television? Don't, it's got to be 100 now. I can't give you any change. Okay?
And you can give it, but send me the receipt.
All right. You hear that, Pat? Mr. Webster needs a receipt.
Come in on that, will you? This is on his. It's $100
It's American.
American.
Uh-oh, that's worth $120 Canadian, isn't it?
So don't forget the receipt's got to say $100.
120 bucks. Thank you, Jack.
Have you
That
got my
is
name right?
Yes, Jack Webster.
How do you
right?
spell Webster?
W-E-B-B.
S-T-E-R. Jamie, you'll
Yes,
be working your heart out
thank
over the
you.
weekend along with all the other good people on the telethon who include, what's his name, Thick,
Oh, Alan is terrific.
Bobby McGrath, Eartha Kitt, she's coming.
Huh? Oh, yeah, Eartha Kitt.
Why
and
didn't they send her out instead of
Danielle
you?
Bresch.
A real woman.
Where's it? You have this?
Ralph Harris, Leon Bibb, Bobby Hales, Big Miller, Lee Norris, Carmi Roslin-Kin, Paul Horton, Debbie Kay, Louise Rose, Peter Chipman, Daniel Brisbois, P. Pruitt, Don Brown and the Professor, Goofy and Minnie Mouse, and such. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jack.
Don't forget the receipt.
I won't forget it. You'll get it as soon as I get off the air. That's a wonderful name for a gentleman who's with the university. Savage. Isn't that a great name?
Thank you very much.
All right, Jack.
Go back to bed and have a good sleep.
I will. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jamie.
It's been a pleasure.
Serious business, if possible, after this. One of the deadly serious keys to any possible peaceful settlement of the constitutional crisis lies in Saskatchewan, because Premier Blakeney and his cabinet have taken a very prominent position in opposing the unilateral repatriation of the Constitution in its present form or in its amended form by Mr. Trudeau. As a matter of fact, my guest now, Roy Romanow, the Attorney General of Saskatchewan, co-chaired the First Minister's Conference with the Prime Minister, did you not?
The ministerial one.
The ministerial conference. And you recently have been deeply involved in secret negotiations with Lalonde, correct?
Correct.
You made a quick trip to Hawaii to pass the messages on to your premier, who refused to accept the deal.
Correct. Very quick trip.
Can you tell me what happened yesterday between Premier Blakeney and the group of federal NDP MPs that he met with? Have we now got a major split between the federal NDP and the Saskatchewan NDP on the Constitution?
Well, Jack, I guess we do have. Perhaps that's overstating it a bit, but we had a situation where we had a special caucus meeting in Saskatchewan to outline for our own provincial MLAs what our position was going to be on the Constitution in the light of the failed negotiations and discussions. It's a standing rule of our caucus that the federal MPs are entitled to come. They were invited and they came. We were not there trying to influence them, perhaps that's a semantics difference, but we were trying to have them parties to our deliberations. We've decided more or less, this is going to be decided by the Premier in the next 4 or 5 days finally, that there's no other option but to oppose the Trudeau package. So in the light of the fact that the federal MPs seem to be so far supporting the package and we're not going to be supporting it, there is, I suppose, a split.
A major split. Now, this is despite the, a split.
A split, yeah.
Yeah. In other words, there's something wrong in the attitude of the federal NDPs which does not agree with your attitude.
That's
in
true.
Saskatchewan.
That's true, Jack. I suppose I should say, in defense of the NDP, is that this is something which I think is almost symptomatic of all the federal parties. We see Bill Yurko, for example, the MP from Alberta, bolting the Joe Clark ranks, and he's going to vote with Prime Minister Trudeau. We see a couple of liberals, same thing. So this is, in fact, one of the difficult things about this whole resolution, frankly, Jack, is that rather than uniting Canadians, in our judgment, it is sharply and deeply dividing Canadians, and it's dividing political parties and dividing people, and I don't see that being very healthy for the country.
Do you think that anything will influence Prime Minister Trudeau to back away from his amended package, which includes repatriation, an amending formula, and the Bill of Rights? Do you see anything which could lead to some form of agreement instead of this divisive eruption in the country?
I see a combination of two things, perhaps a continuing drop in public opinion support for his party, coupled with a withdrawal of support by Mr. Broadbent of Mr. Trudeau, because the key to this package being accepted in London, in Westminster, in my judgment, is that it's got to clear the Canadian House, or the Canadian Houses, with some degree of regional support right across the board, across Canada. And since Mr. Trudeau has nobody west of Winnipeg, and since he's not going to get any PC support, that support really is very much dependent upon what the New Democratic Party does. So that if Mr. Broadbent and his caucus should decide to withdraw or to at least to modify their support, then I can see Mr. Trudeau having second thoughts and we returning back to the constitutional table.
Would you like to see Broadbent walk away from liberal support, from support of the Liberal package now?
Personally, yes, I would, because I think the package really has 2 or 3 major problems with it. First of all, the potential for unilateral action remains yet. I mean, the unilateral action is before us, and in order to satisfy Canadians that it can't happen again, we've got to do something with that referendum mechanism which could potentially change the Constitution in the future unilaterally. Secondly, it's got to have something for every region of the country. I don't think it has very much for Western Canada. I think resources are very big for Canada. And thirdly, it's got to be true to the federal system of government. We don't have a unitary system of government. I think by those 3 tests, one should say the package fails in its support.
Well, let's go through that. We may be a bit in on this, but people who are interested must know about it.
Right.
First of all, the NDP federally said, look, Trudeau's going to give us a clear-cut statement on the ownership of resources. Are you happy with that statement?
Yes.
That's one thing you're agreed on.
That's right. That is, and that, to Mr. Broadbent's credit, is something which was negotiated with Mr. Trudeau. Yes.
Secondly, Broadbent did make the feds back down on putting property rights in as a matter of federal.
Yes, I think that also was good. Not because we're against any kind of protection of property rights, Jack. I want to make that absolutely clear. But the difficulty is that when you put it in a constitution, the definition and the redefinition of that is transferred from politicians to the courts, and I think that there is a big danger there. But that's another argument for another day.
No, it's not, because you have a practical problem in Saskatchewan that we talked about before, whereby you have a discriminatory law for the good of Saskatchewan, which might be upset by a constitutional property phrase.
Yes, although we're not so much worried about that law and property rights, technically speaking,
farmland.
Here. But there is another aspect of it, and farmland is an aspect of it. You're right, essentially.
Did the feds not bend over backwards to give you indirect taxation on your potash?
Yes, they did.
And on heavy oil? Did they not give you a step?
There is a provision on interprovincial trade and commerce for heavy oil, or generally for all resources. I think the answer to that is yes.
But your position basically is against this multifaceted repatriation of the Constitution.
Well, our position, Jack, has got to be put in these terms. You've gone through the list of what we have received, in effect, and I would be less than fair if I didn't say that Prime Minister Trudeau and Mr. Broadbent negotiated some benefits for Western Canada. But we're looking at the package as a whole. And as we look at it in the whole, there are 2 or 3 areas of major concern. If I can just take 30 seconds to
No,
tell you.
take what time you need.
First of all, on resources, while we have indirect taxation and interprovincial trade and commerce, if you will, potash and heavy oil, there is nothing with respect to international trade. If a resource touches on the international market and the province tries to legislate on that, BC timber, forestry products as an example, there would be no constitutional base for it. That the resolution does not have. Point number 1. Point number 2, the referendum is still there. And the referendum can be used to amend the Constitution, which is the basic law of our country, bypassing the provincial governments. Who decides if the referendum should be called? The federal government. Who decides the question? The federal government. Who decides how it should be refereed? The federal government.
Who decides the advertising?
The federal government, that's right. And we say in a federal system, it's a finely balanced situation between 2 orders or 2 levels of government, the provinces and the federal government. So we're opposed to that. It's unamended. And thirdly, just a few days ago, they constitutionalized, the federal government did, the Senate. Now, British Columbia out here, Premier Bennett, Dave Barrett, all of these people, and we too have been arguing for a reformed upper house. Now, what has happened by an amendment to Section 44 of the clause, it's constitutionalizing the Senate. The effect of that is that no future reform of an upper house can ever be had except but with the consent of the upper house, namely the Senate. And 116 years of Canadian history shows us that we're not going to get their support.
Didn't realize that. He has given the Senate veto over its own future reform.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
That's knuckling under to the old boys in the Senate, isn't it?
Exactly, and it also indicates
to get the bill passed.
Exactly, and exactly the point that I want to that I'm trying to make at the University of British Columbia and elsewhere.
That.
And that's exactly what I say is the politics of desperation, which is coming into play in the making of a constitution. You've got to ease the old boys in the Senate, so you give them their right of veto. Now you have a problem with, as genuine as it may be, with Indian and Métis people. You put something in on historic constitutional rights. Then you have something here with respect to mentally handicapped. You put it in. I'm not against these individual groups. I mean, that is important. But really, we've got to stop as Canadians and ask ourselves, is this the way we build a constitution? I just think that it's crazy.
I'm going to have the Prime Minister here next week, probably,
yes.
Hopefully, all being well. Delicate negotiations, etc.
Well, don't go to Hawaii. I can help it.
I can put it to Trudeau, therefore.
Yes, Section 44 constitutionalizes the Senate, and why?
And gives the Senate the power to veto its own reformation.
Right. And his answer will be that we've got 10% attrition of senators every year, and if we want to, we'll just simply not fill the vacancies. Or we can add an additional 20 or 30 to get around this. To which my answer would be, I won't be speaking to him, you will be. If that is there, why hasn't it been utilized to date by any Canadian government? And the answer is that we simply haven't had the political will to tackle the old boys club. And the fact of the matter is it's a politics of desperation. They need the Senate in order to get the resolution through.
Yeah. If they don't have a quick passage in the Senate, he's one step behind in his British caper.
It's dead. It can never get to London, Westminster, unless it has a Senate approval by resolution and an approval by the House of Commons. Now, he thinks he's got the House of Commons support because of Mr. Broadbent and his own caucus. But the Senate's another thing. And they said, in order for them to vote for this resolution, you've got to give us the veto or the final say about our own reform. And waiting for that is like waiting, I would say, virtually forever.
It's not only the politics of desperation, but in reference to the Senate, it's the politics of privilege.
In my view, it is. And I think as Canadians, Jack, what makes this even more galling to me is this. If in a federal system, there are one of 2 ways we can reform the federal system. You can redefine the powers between the provinces and the federal government. We're trying to do that. That's one way. Another way to legitimately tackle constitutional reform is to give more input for the regions in the center. Now, British Columbia has been very much concerned about getting the BC voice into the center. The Senate is supposed to be an institution of the center. Now, the way to do that is to have some form of a House of Provinces or a Council of the Provinces, however you want to describe it. But the only way you can get that reform now is if you get the Senate's approval. And I just simply say that's impossible.
More with Roy Romano, Attorney General of Saskatchewan. Constitutional expert, I would say.
Thank you.
After the break. Too late, my dear.
Your phone should be fine, Jack.
Are you there? Somebody here. Hello.
Put the phone down. Put the phone down. There.
They should be fine now.
studio.
No, he's left. I'm sorry.
Hello there. Let me talk to you anyway. Are you there?
Yeah.
Well, the phones are fine now.
Yeah, they're working now, Jack.
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold, and I'll come back to you in a second. Oh, I don't care about that. I'm just checking the phone. Did you hear anything when I put you on hold?
Just a beep, that's all.
Just a what?
Just a beep.
Beep, 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 beep.
No, just one beep.
Oh, I'll put you on hold again. Oh, never mind. Okay, bye. You can check the phones. I, of course, am impressed by the expertise of Roy Romanow, the Attorney General of Saskatchewan. But if it comes to the crunch in this country, Mr. Romanow, this will be a basic emotional pitch by the Prime Minister on which all our fancy little issues, which I might understand some of, will be forgotten. Is that not so?
That's right.
Can the Prime Minister not stand up to this nation and say, we are big boys. Who are these Brits to mess us around? I can send them whatever I want, and if they don't pass it, the heck with Britain.
He can say that, and he probably will say that, but it's phony. Because the fact of the matter
Why is it phony?
Well, in 1931, the British people passed a bill called the Statute of Westminster. And the effect of the Statute of Westminster was that the British Parliament would have no control or say at all over any Canadian matter except one, the British North America Act, which is still, after all, a British bill. And both the federal government and the provincial governments of the day in 1931, both of them came to Britain and said, put in on Section 7 on the Statute of Westminster a provision which in effect makes you, the British people, the trustees of the division of powers between the provinces and the federal government. And now it can hardly be fair, I think, 50 years later, for a Prime Minister to say, because we as Canadians asked the Brits to be trustees, that now that they're doing their job of checking to see whether or not the balance of powers is affected, that somehow this is meddling. They didn't want this power in 1931.
But must these interfering busybody backbenchers or committee chairmen like Sir Anthony Kershaw, must they look at it legally? I mean, surely it's the old Nelson touch.
Well, I think
Pierre to Maggie saying, we want it, just do what you're told, don't meddle.
Well, I think that if that is a justifiable approach in anything, leave that aside for the moment, we're talking here about, again, a constitution of a country. And there are two questions here that are at issue, Jack. One question is, what laws or conventions are required in order to get the Constitution by Canadian laws? Leave that aside for the moment. That's being decided by the courts now, the Manitoba Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. But the other issue is, over there in London, what is required legally for the British Parliament to properly and legally deal with that resolution? And Section 7, 1931 Statute of Westminster, obligates the British people to act as a trustee. And I don't know how people interpret that word trustee, but I think it carries an obvious connotation. So Kershaw just simply says, look here, we're trustees, and we have to make sure that what comes over, he's talking about himself, not about us, what comes over meets the requirements of the Canadian system, and he uses the words as a federal system, not a unitary system. Now, Prime Minister Trudeau is saying, the heck with the federal nature. If the House of Commons and the Senate says this is it, it's it. Now, that may be the case here. The question is whether or not it obligates the Brits. That's another issue. And I think 1931 and Section 7 of the Statute of Westminster would raise a very good legal argument in that regard.
That's providing we go by rule of the courts.
Yes, well, again, but that's
But we
true.
don't have to, do we?
We don't have to.
I mean, the British parliamentary system, or our parliamentary system based on the British tradition, surely is that they can do anything to anyone.
Yes.
By resolution of the House of Commons, including making you pregnant. But the only thing they can't do is make you love the child.
That's right.
Is that not the political power in its barest essence?
That's right. It certainly is in the British Parliament, where there is no other level of government. In the Canadian government, the Canadian Parliament is supreme, subject to the limitations of the provincial areas of supremacy. So there's a bit of a limitation. Maybe there is some BNA provision which says provinces have a right to make you love your child. I don't know. But it would be that limitation on the Canadian
Well, that's
Parliament
another good
that
point.
doesn't exist on
In
the
a unitary state, the parliamentary system
supreme.
is by itself supreme.
Right, but in the Canadian federal system, it is not, because it is subject to the provisions of the provincial jurisdiction.
But the provision put in 1931 at the request of the Canadian federal and provincial governments was done at a time when Canada, to some extent, was a little bit of a colony.
Yes, that's true. And we were still not
Defense, naval bases,
Yes.
all kinds of things.
That's true. I mean, I understand I would imagine I can understand the times, 1930-31. And quite frankly, Jack, I have to admit to you, after having said all that I say, that as a Canadian born here in this country, I feel a little bit concerned that we're taking our constitutional and political problems overseas and having it argued in Kershaw. And to that extent, I'm sympathetic to the Prime Minister. But again, I'm saying that what we are talking about here is the very nature of Canada. Is it a federal system or is it not? And if it is a federal system, then the rules of changing the system and what is left in the system are very important, not only for us, but those in whom we have charged the responsibility of acting as trustees.
Therefore, Trudeau has deliberately structured this to put the weight on the British, but not the responsibility on the British. He says, pass it.
That's right. He says pass it, and he says pass it based on a conversation that I had with Prime Minister Thatcher. And the position that his government and his officials take is that if Prime Minister Thatcher has a problem getting it through the British House, that's their problem, not Prime Minister Trudeau's or ours. And I suppose, as you say, like Lord Nelson, you can wink or let it go by, or however it goes, you could perhaps approach it from that point of view.
But even if you let it go through, we might run into trouble in the Supreme Court of Canada.
Well, that's true. And of course, the Manitoba Court of Appeal decision is being appealed to the Supreme Court.
Just a minute. If the British House of Commons did something before the Supreme Court of Canada decision...
Well, you've put your finger right on it. I mean, that's part of the reason why the British people are so nervous about this, why the backbenchers are nervous. What does it make them look like, getting the resolution to go through, and then all of a sudden have our, have our Supreme Court of Canada say, it's all illegal?
Oh, that couldn't happen, could
Well, it certainly could happen.
He's going for July the 1st, which is now probably impossible.
Possibly impossible.
And he might, supposing Maggie says, pass the damn thing.
Yeah.
And then the Supreme Court of Canada says, it's the wrong way to do it.
Well, you know, Jack, again, we've got to keep in mind that the decision in the Manitoba Court of Appeal was 3-2 in favor of the legality of the federal government. 3-2. So on a 9-man Supreme Court decision, keeping in mind there are 3 from Quebec and the like, I don't know what the decision would be. All that I'm saying is that it's a heck of a way to run a railroad.
Are you also fearful, though, taking that 3-2 decision of the Supreme Court down the roads when our Constitution is entrenched in his Bill of Rights, that you could pack a Supreme Court?
Well, you know, you're talking about my constitutional expertise. This perhaps sounds like I'm pandering to you, but your constitutional expertise is impressive too, because that's another area of concern. About the property rights, you mentioned that. But we do not constitutionalize our Supreme Court in this process. We constitutionalize some of our institutions, but not the Supreme Court. Accordingly, I don't suggest Prime Minister Trudeau would do this. I want to make it absolutely clear.
No, that's why I said down the road.
But down the road, there's no, the way it presently stands, there is nothing that says you cannot have 15 Supreme Court judges. Right now it's 9. The only way you protect that, if you have an entrenched Charter of Rights, is to entrench your Supreme Court so that you can't monkey with it in terms of composition, in terms of mandate. That isn't done yet. The Supreme Court is still not constitutionalized. So the answer to your question is yes, it's possible, and therefore the importance on the Charter of Rights becomes increasingly more evident.
And you don't want that Charter of Rights sent from the Federal to the House of Commons in London and back to here?
Well,
in fact, you don't want the Charter of Rights.
Well, on balance, you're right, but I must say that there are arguments for a Charter of Rights, and I'm not trying to be walking the fence here. There are strong arguments for a Charter of Rights, but if you put me right up against the wall, we don't want one. And I think the majority of the provinces don't want one. And the reason that they don't is because it inevitably will alter the fundamental powers of a province.
Where are you speaking today?
Speaking to the University of British Columbia
What time?
students. At noon, law students and faculty at noon, and then tomorrow to something called the University of Saskatchewan Alumni Association Vancouver branch, which I gather will be a fairly large meeting. Unfortunately, we have a lot of Saskatchewan people in Vancouver.
I got to warn you, when Joe was out there the other day, he packed the place.
Did he?
Huzzas, hoorays, applause.
Oh, I see.
All the way.
Well, my speech is strictly to the lawyers. Maybe they'll maybe they'll give me a different reception. Who knows?
I'm going to try the phones on this morning. We'll try one call to see if they're working. I think they are.
See what happens.
See what happens. Roy Romanow, Attorney General of Saskatchewan. It's a tough one, this. After the break. I made a joking reference earlier on about the moles in London. Do you believe these telexes that have been leaked out of Gene Wadd's office in London?
No. I don't know where they're being leaked from, but my...
leaked, yeah. Somewhere.
Well, I think it's frankly, I think it's right from within Ottawa, somewhere in the Prime Minister's office or Federal Provincial Relations office, somebody who doesn't like what is happening and is leaking the information. I don't condone it, but it makes interesting reading, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's quite possible. McGuigan was asked a question and dodged it yesterday about if this kind of thing happened. He said, well, we live in the real world.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody's interested enough to have shotgun mics at various places.
But it makes you
even in
wonder.
Saskatchewan.
But it makes you, well, maybe. I would say,
I doubt it.
I doubt it very much. But what makes it, to me, fascinating is who in the world would believe the argument that the Brits are monitoring the telephone calls and the cables between London and Ottawa? I mean,
I can't think of a bigger waste of time.
I can't either. Maybe the Russians would have some interest in us, but I'm not even so sure of that either. So, I mean, sometimes I wonder whether it isn't fantasy land, this whole
But the
thing.
real tragedy over this, Mr. Romanoff, surely is the fact that the nation's going to hell in a handbasket some way, and all our energies are diverted, say, from energy to arguing about Constitution.
Well, I'm very worried, like you, with this matter, and particularly out here in Western Canada. I don't know the British Columbia situation badly, but I can tell you, Jack, that in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, this is a community of 10,000 people. It was the provincial riding of our Premier, Tommy Douglas. About 3 weeks ago, there were 1,200 people packed a meeting of something called Westfed, the separation operation. Now, I don't know whether they were curiosity seekers or what they were, but I'm in politics, and I know how tough it is to get 1,200 people for a community of less than 10,000 in an area that Tommy Douglas represented. That is an indication of a malaise that has to be met by responsible Canadians. And that's an energy we should be directing our efforts to. And I'm just worried that the way this constitutional debate is going, as the rhetoric increases, as the unreasonableness increases, we've got some major problems.
Wait till we come to... Will there be a crunch on March the 1st when Lougheed starts cutting back his oil production? Will it just be a flurry of news? We'll have television coverage of the oil slowing down. We'll have statements out of Alberta.
I think it'll be a crunch. Shortly thereafter, it'll be a crunch. If, in fact, he follows through, it'll be quite a pinch. And it'll be not only an energy crunch, but it'll be a constitutional crunch, without a doubt.
All right, let's see if we've whipped up any interest at all in Saskatchewan's position, on the federal NDP's position, and the Western Province's position on the Constitution. It's like Halloween every day, isn't it? Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Two questions for Mr. Romanow, short and brief. Number one, does he think there's a possibility that the UK Parliament would simply abolish Section 7 of the Statute of Westminster? Number two, in the event that the Trudeau government pushes through this Constitution in its present form, how would that leave any of the province who decide to pull out from under?
Decide to pull out from under, how do you mean? Decide to pull out from under? Because if it goes through, I don't see how the provinces can pull out from under. It becomes the basic law.
Yeah.
It becomes the basic law. Let me just try and answer it very briefly, Jack. First of all, the question is, will Section 7, is there any chance that the UK Parliament will simply repeal Section 7? I frankly don't think that's a possibility, although I have seen some editorial speculation in the Times, London Times, suggesting that as a possibility, and in effect turning the whole problem over to us. I don't see that. I think that the British people really, as much as they dislike it, are going to see it through the end. On the second question, I'm not sure what the caller meant when he said to pull out from under, but if the Charter of Rights becomes a part of the Constitution, very difficult to pull out from under.
Former Gordon Robertson, former Secretary to the Privy Council,
yes,
right?
Very respected man.
Used to be at Trudeau's elbow.
Right.
And Pearson's elbow.
Right, indeed.
Suggested yesterday that perhaps the thing to do is to bring back an amending formula and the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and give the provinces 4 years to opt in if they wish to the Charter of Rights.
Right, and there's one other aspect of the proposal which must not be overlooked, and that is either do away with the referendum mechanism to change the Constitution or give the provinces the weapon of the referendum, reciprocity so-called, which is something that does not take place. Robertson also recommended that, and I would categorize both of, or all of those suggestions as very useful, very helpful in trying to get Canadians to find out some middle ground and get off this self-defeating debate.
Pity he's not there now, Mr. Robertson.
Yes, it is a pity.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'd like to ask, in this present draft for the repatriation of the Constitution, are some of the provinces getting a veto? Or no?
A veto, I don't understand.
He's talking about Ontario and...
on the amending formula.
Yes.
Yes, in a sense they are, because there are two ways in which the Constitution is going to be amended. Under Section 41, our Constitution will be amended if the following takes place. 2 provinces out of 4 from the West, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, equaling 50% of the population, plus 2 provinces from the East equaling 50%, plus Ontario, plus Quebec, plus House of Commons, plus Senate. If all of those pass resolutions in that configuration, you've got an amendment. So the caller is saying, is he giving some of the provinces a veto? The answer is yes, because if the province of Quebec or Ontario say no, regardless if 2 out of 4 from the West or 2 out of 4 from the East say yes, it's the end of the amendment.
Do they not also have a built-in advantage in that if their population drops, they still hold a veto?
That's true. That's another criticism. I think one thing which can be argued for this proposal is the fact that it's the so-called Victoria formula. This formula that I've outlined is the last time the governments were the closest to agreeing to an amendment formula. That was in 1970-71 when they met in Victoria. The late Premier Bennett was the Premier. The only province that withheld its support ultimately was Quebec, 3 weeks after the conference broke up. Everybody else agreed. So I think Prime Minister Trudeau is justifying this on the argument it's the closest one to the last agreement.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. I was wondering, I wanted to speak in support of Mr. Trudeau in regards to the Constitution bringing it to Canada. I think it's ridiculous. For years and years and years, we've been trying to get together in regards to bringing this back to Canada. And I wanted to ask the Attorney General, does he really think that if these changes aren't made in the Constitution in the British Parliament and it's brought over here without these changes, we're going to go on for another 50 years or 60 years before these amendments are going to be put into our Constitution, and it's useless. And I just think it's best to have it changed there instead of bringing it to Canada.
Well, I'd like to make 2 points if I can, Jack. First of all, I very much share the sympathy of the caller and perhaps Prime Minister Trudeau, all of us, about the frustration of Canadians not being able to come to grips with their own Constitution. And I can understand that may be part of the fuel which is generating this present initiative. But having said that, the second point I want to make is that it's incorrect to say that we as Canadians for 50 years have been trying to implement, for example, a Charter of Rights. This is a very recent phenomenon of 1976, and in truth, it's only been seriously looked at since I was first co-chairman in 1978-79. Now, maybe an argument can be advanced that we as a society simply aren't ready for it. It may be a tremendous idea, I don't know, but surely as society evolves by consensus, especially our Canadian society, only 24 million people, so close to the U.S. border and the like, maybe we should be evolving, and we're not ready for it.
You're saying he's muddying the waters of the repatriation by throwing this unneeded Charter of Rights.
Well, or at least questionable Charter of Rights, and saying that for 50 years we've been trying to get it and we can't. It's not true. We haven't been able to patriate with an amending formula for 50 years, but the Charter is an added new issue, which is very new.
Last question, short answer. When will it all end?
Well, in the words of a famous philosopher by the name of Yogi Berra, it isn't over until it's over. And I guess it'll end when it ends. I don't know, Jack.
My thanks to Roy Romano, Attorney General of Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much.
UBC today.
UBC.
Law faculty and the Saskatchewan people tomorrow.
That's right.
Alumni.
That's right.
I can't say the best of British luxury now because that's a bad word.
Well, you gave me Saskatchewan snow today, so I'm at home.
No, we didn't. That's a mere nothing. Next, what is it? The last of the Sweeneys in the barrel business. After the break. Everybody in British Columbia who has driven across the old Cambie Street Bridge has looked down on Sweeney Cooperage. Barrels for everything. Well, now they've got a barrel for the last of the Sweeneys. Frank Sweeney, who runs the cooperage where some of the machinery is 100 years old, and where they've been making barrels under his famous father, Michael Leo Sweeney, since 1920. But part of the cooperage, it's only 1.6 acres, but part of the cooperage is right in the footprint of the stadium. It's in the bleacher area of the stadium. And so Frank, who's only on a lease for a couple more years, has been given the word, you're going to lose a big chunk of Sweeney Cooperage. Don't know what he's going to do. It's a battle of the bucks now. You've got to have sympathy for Frank Sweeney. Frank?
Uh-huh.
It's a while since we've played golf together.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And now you're up to your neck in both nostalgia and trouble. Is that right?
That's about it, Jack, yeah.
Is it proper to suggest that you are over one of these?
I would say so, except the one I'm over with is round. This is oval. This is more of an art to make this one.
Frank Sweeney is over a barrel at the moment.
I think so.
Frank, how many Sweeneys did there used to be in the cooperage business?
Well,
right here underneath the... Which bridge is that? The Cambie Street Bridge in Vancouver.
It's also known as the Connaught. Did you know that, Jack? The
Didn't
Connaught
know
Street
that.
Bridge? Yeah. Well, well, my father, of course, he started it. He was the dynamo behind it. And then I had my 3 sisters that worked in the office. And then I'm the 5th of 5 brothers. I ended up with the... I didn't inherit it. I think I was...
You ended up holding the barrel.
That's
is that
it,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Your father, Michael Leo Sweeney, of course, was a great tourist booster for Vancouver and used to send out these fabulous family Christmas cards every year.
Yes, yeah, he
Now,
did.
when did the Sweeneys move in here?
Well, my father moved from Victoria in 1920, Jack.
And started up the cooperage here?
Yes, right. He could never buy the property because CPR owned half the town, and this was CPR property, so he took what he always spoke as a 99-year lease, but I'm finding out that maybe it wasn't 99 years.
We'll come to that miserable truth
Yeah.
later on, perhaps, and what you
Sure.
hope to achieve. But in those days, how many cooperages were there on the west coast of the States and Canada?
Oh, there was at least 20, Jack. There was old Vancouver Cooperage, which he bought out when he came over here from Victoria, and then there was a good half a dozen in Washington State, another half a dozen in Oregon State, and about 15 in California, the biggest in the world in California.
How many wooden barrel cooperages are left now?
We're the only one west of the Mississippi in
North America.
North America, and there's one in Ontario, and then there's about 5 in the United States.
Maybe it's time you folded your staves. But what's that you've got in your hand? What's
That's
that?
a Cooper's hammer, Jack. 3-pound Cooper's hammer.
Maybe it's time you folded your staves, threw away your hammer, took what they offered you and packed it in.
Not in your life, boy. No.
No way.
No. Once a Cooper, always a Cooper. Live and die. And, going around the barrel.
Now, I'll tell you what we're going to do now. We're going to take a walk through the part of this place that BC Place arrogantly wants to seize.
That's correct. That's
in the public interest.
No, I don't agree with that.
Because you don't matter anymore.
No, well, no, that's right. We've only had a couple of hundred men for 30 years, law-abiding citizens paying their taxes, and we paid our taxes and our rent to the CPR.
But who are you to stop the construction of a stadium because they need part of this place for the bleachers?
Yeah, well, I think that they're in the bleachers right now. I don't know, but that's where I hope they end up at.
All right, before I ask you what you want and what they've offered you, let's go for a wee walk around.
Okay,
Will you? Do you mind?
Right.
And you'll show me some of the historical parts of the Sweeney Cooperage.
Sure, I'd be more than happy
Come on
to,
this
Jack.
way. Come on. Now, Frank, you go first.
Okay.
I want you to show me around.
It's too bad it's winter here because that swells every winter.
I'm particularly interested in seeing where they used to keep the mules, right?
Oh, sure, I'd be more than happy to.
But
The BC Sugar Refinery used to keep the mules there. It was a drayage shed for them.
A drayage shed?
Yeah, well, you know, where the mules come and they get feeded and stay at night, and we found 2...
You telling me the Stephen Rogers family used to run this place as BC Sugar Refinery?
Yes, sir.
He's the head of BC Place. He's the man that's moving in on you.
Well, my God, maybe...
Andy, come here, Andy.
Yeah.
Introduce me.
This Andy Castellan, he's been my foreman for 42 years, and my father's, his father was my father's foreman for another 42 years.
So the Castellan family's got 80-odd years service in the Sweeney Cooperage.
And his uncle, 52.
Your uncle?
Just retired.
52 years.
Nick Dekoff.
Well, it looks like the end of the road for you, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Come on and show me where the Rogers family used to keep the mules.
Yeah, okay. We'll show you.
We got to go see where they kept the mules in the hay.
I kept jackasses too, Jack, not mules.
Mules and jackasses. Frank, all the old-timers remember Michael Leo Sweeney, whom I've mentioned already. When did he die?
He died in 1978, Jack.
78?
September 18th, yeah.
Okay, Frank Sweeney.
Yeah.
As we come up here, this is not the oldest part of the plant, is it?
No. This is a relatively new part, Jack, here. This is our a plant that was built in 1937. This is where we make all the barrels.
You'll forgive me if I say it looks more like 1897 than 1937, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know whether I will forgive you or not, Jack.
How many people do you employ? This is very seasonal. How many people do you employ?
15 now. 15. Yeah, and this is our slowest time of the year. It's always seasonal.
But aren't wooden barrels really a thing of the past, except for maybe whiskey?
Not on your life, Jack. No sirree.
What about you make planters for stores?
Oh, yeah, planters, that's a small part of it, but we're going to have several carloads coming in here, cutting them in half, hoop fastening them, sanding them, and going out. It'll be like Grand Central Station out there on the 50-yard line.
How much land do you have under lease here?
1.66 acres.
Now, your father always talked about a 99-year lease, but it wasn't.
No, I guess that was just in theory, yeah. It was.
And recently, what happened to you? BC Place took over the Marathon CPR lease.
At the end of November of 1980, last year, Marathon paid CPR $30 million in property and a choice property. No, they paid them $30 million cash to relocate a bunch of ties and tracks out there, which they had already relocated in Coquitlam probably the last 3 or 4 years for
the family's
tenth
been here,
of that.
The family's been in business here since 1920.
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
But your lease...
Lock, stock, and barrel.
Your new lease transferred to BC Place runs out when? 1983.
The end of 82, December 31, 82.
82.
With a proviso that either party, this was with CPR now, or Marathon, really, the real estate arm, with a proviso that either party can give the others a year's notice.
But they came to you, Frank, let's be honest about it, and they said, okay, Frank, baby, we're going to take how much of your place?
1.66 acres.
That's a total acreage?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, they're going to take how much of it?
Well, they want, they say a little square part, but it's 13,000 square feet, and it's a vital part of our place. It's where all outgoing barrels by rail go, and it's where all incoming stock stays, hoop steel, heading material come in by rail.
Now that's your new shed.
Yeah. That's newer than our plant here.
When was the new shed built?
Well, there was a big wind here in 1964. I don't know whether it was caused by some politician or what.
Hurricane Frida.
Oh well. Yeah, it wasn't Hurricane Wacky, I guess.
No, and they put up the new shed there.
Yeah, we had cement floor, new corrugated siding. It's a dandy. I'll show it to you.
And that's your main entrance up there, isn't it?
That's it.
For your supplies and your stock.
It's vital.
Okay.
And plus, where I'll cut all our hoop steel for the various dozen or more size barrels we make.
Listen, I want to go into the plant because I'm freezing to death.
Yeah.
Before we do that, though,
yeah.
Was it old Major Matthews and you were poking around here in the mule shed?
Yeah, well, this was in the 60s, Jack. We've got this, not the mule shed, drayage shed, where the mules... mules, or jackasses stayed overnight after they pulled the sugar for Stephen Rogers' grandfather.
And now Stephen Rogers is in charge of BC Place.
Ironic, isn't it?
And he's putting a barrel to you, isn't he?
Well, I don't know. We still got a lot of stays here. We got tens of thousands of 1-inch.
Mind you, you couldn't say this was an historic site because another big wind and it might blow away, Frank.
Well, I don't know. Major Matthews thought it was when we had him coming here in the 60s. He ran down. We were shoring up some of the joists in the building, and there was an 1893
newspaper,
San Francisco newspaper. I guess one of the workers at lunchtime put it in there, and there was also two mule shoes.
All right, two mule shoes.
Yeah, and you can tell by the outside of the building, the square nails, it was made only in England in the 1800s.
You could give the mule shoes to, no insult intended, to Stephen Rogers.
Well, maybe so, but...
okay, come on, let's go inside.
Okay.
I'm freezing to death. Frank, maybe you could ask him to stop because of the...
Hey, Aldo, conserve a little energy. This is the days of energy conservation, Jack, so we better keep up with the times.
How are you, Aldo? How long have you worked here, Aldo?
About 30 years, pretty close.
30 years?
Yeah. I started in 1951.
Aldo what?
Stephanie.
Oh, Italian. Ex-Italian. Italian-Canadian.
Yeah, that's Canadian.
Nice to meet you. I want to chat him up now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Now, let's get down to cases, Frank.
Uh-huh.
You're here on a lease, right?
Yes.
Which expires, even if it's a BC Place lease, at the end of 82.
Correct.
Now, they only want part of the operation.
Correct.
Why can't you accept the $5,000 a month they've given you so you can put your storage elsewhere and continue to run the cooperage?
Jack, they might know how to build a stadium, but I don't believe they know how to run a barrel business, because you've got to have your supplies coming back and forth 2 or 3 times, different operations, before you get the barrel rolling out to the door.
Now, have they made you... You say they gave the CPR 30 million, that's one thing. Have they compensated anybody else who was in a lease to go and re-establish?
We're almost certain that they're very secretive, just like they... today at noon, I went up there with a barrel stave to see the 1201 sod turning, and there was nobody there.
Couldn't find it?
No. Well, I was on the 50-yard, what's going to be the 50-yard line, if and when.
And there was nobody there?
Nobody there.
What were you going to do with a barrel stave?
Well, maybe the Premier would have been around, and I could have given him a gentle reminder on the rectum.
You mean belted him with a barrel stave?
Well, the tap, love tap, maybe.
Yeah, non-politically, of course.
Oh, yeah, sure, right.
Now... But have they offered you any cash deal to get up and go?
No, none whatsoever, except this 5,000.
Didn't they offer you 240,000?
Well, yeah, but that's all iffy, and they have papers in their hand. I was too honest from the very beginning. I showed them where it would cost $1.1 million 6 months ago to move lock, stock, and barrel and to be back in the business as we should and intend to be.
So you want a couple of million?
Well, now with the rate of inflation, yeah, that might be why it's going up so fast.
Oh, that's a bit much, Frank, isn't it? I mean, the poor...
Jack...
you don't own the land.
How many times have you seen something that is... Well, you don't own land, you don't own your house, I don't own my house if I don't pay my taxes for 5 years. We've been paying taxes here for 60 years. Hundreds of men that are gainfully employed here have been paying their property taxes for 60 years and income taxes around here. And that's all for naught now, eh?
You're willing...
Just because they want some lousy rugger stadium.
All right, you're willing to go if they give you enough to re-establish?
Yeah, you betcha.
And 240,000 isn't enough?
It's not even close.
Can I bid you down to $500,000?
Well, maybe we could have a hand cooper shop at that. But...
A hand coopery shop. And you could keep your old fellows employed for time to come.
Sure.
Well, I think you're in the way of progress, Frank.
No, this isn't... Well, what's more progressive than this? Jack, I had a long-time customer phone me from California today. We're the only one that makes this size barrel in the world. And I sent out an iffy letter a couple of months ago, and it said, we don't know what the situation in the next year or two, so could you give us as much notice on your requirement? And when I told them about what was happening around here, I don't think it was biased.
What do you put in these barrels?
Mild cured salmon. It's the bigger the salmon, the better, and they split. That's why you got to have the big diameter.
Is the Jewish delicacy of lox.
That's right, lox and bagels.
Does anybody
How
ever...
do you know that?
Well, I've been around.
Sure.
Does anybody ever use these barrels for individual hot tubs?
Oh, yeah, we've been selling a half a dozen a year for one anyway. Our representative from Vancouver South, he bought a couple, and I think I gave them to him at a cost. Maybe it was a mistake. Stephen Rogers, he got a couple for his retreat home up in Bone Island after the zoo over in Victoria.
Oh, we've got to get a picture of Steve Rogers in his individual hot tub, in which you'd like to put him and turn up the heat.
Either that or to have him get out of the barrel and let me put him over it or something like that, Jack.
Best of luck, Frank.
Thanks a lot.
I'm sure they'll come around and give you something reasonable, at least to get out.
Don't hold your breath, though, Jack.
Don't you hold yours?
We've been, they've been, what do you call it, developing this property for 20 years that I know of.
And now they've come to the moment of truth over the bar.
Well, yeah, but maybe so.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Jack.
We'll have a game of golf soon.
I hope so. You straighten out your drive?
No.
Oh, well.
The Canadian Association of University Teachers represents 25,000 professors and librarians in universities across the country. I'm going to find out now from Donald Savage, the executive secretary, if they're in a panic about what they fear are the federal government plans to cut billions, which might well affect the universities from their future budgets. What are you afraid of?
That's exactly what we're afraid of. For 30 years, the federal government and the provinces have had a series of agreements by which they jointly fund the universities and colleges of this country. This has been renewed from time to time, and the federal government is drawing up plans for a renegotiation with the provinces, and those plans indicate, so far as our intelligence is concerned, that they effectively wish to abolish their cash transfers to the provinces for post-secondary education, and we're talking about $1.5 billion or thereabouts if they in fact go ahead with that proposal.
Just a minute, that's a lot of money. So you've got moles or some intelligence within the federal government that you fear that as they renegotiate their cost-sharing programs with the provinces, they're going to cut your throat.
That's exactly what we fear. As you know, those cost-sharing programs cover Medicare, hospital insurance, and post-secondary education.
I know. That I know something about, because in the original days with Medicare, and I believe with education, the federal government said, look, we'll match everything you put up. We'll put up 50% of your costs for these great burgeoning things like Medicare, hospital insurance, and post-secondary education. Am I right?
That's correct, yes.
And now, of course, they're being hammered on the deficit, so they're pulling back. But didn't they pull back partially in 1977?
Yes, that was the last renegotiation. They created a new formula then, and the federal government is very unhappy with that formula. It has some good reasons to be, but it should be remembered that they drew up those proposals in secret. They negotiated them with the provinces in secret. They explicitly rejected our suggestions and criticisms at that time, so they have nobody to blame but themselves for the difficulties. But the difficulties indicate that it is not just the federal government which is at fault in these arrangements. The formula in 1977 allows the provinces to run down their contributions and to thereby run up the federal contributions in cash. And that's exactly what's happened. So that the federal government has some reason to renegotiate with the provinces and say, okay, let's have a more reasonable kind of deal.
A better share for the feds.
That's right, but perhaps something more like what we had before. However, that's not what they're planning to do. They're planning a massive reduction. And any oratory about let's rearrange things a little bit is, in our view, a smokescreen for what is going to be a substantial change in federal-provincial relations, and one in which we think would do immeasurable harm to the provinces and to the social programs which are funded by the federal government.
Now, I know that they've been worried witless about the cost of Medicare and hospital insurance. Did they not transfer some of the income tax to the provinces to pay for that?
Yes, they did. They transferred both cash and tax points. The expectation was that the tax points would grow in value. They haven't because of the performance of the economy. But I think it's worth going back, since you mentioned the deficit, to ask the question, why is there a rapidly increasing federal deficit? And the answer to that, of course, is that we have to pay for the federal government's oil policy. And basically, as I personally see it anyway, what's happening is that the universities and the other social services, which are governed by these transfer payments, are being asked to pay for that. And I think that's outrageous.
You mean you're going back to this new burden on the Canadian taxpayer to buy, for instance, Petrofina, or the Canadian ownership charge in the energy policy?
To subsidize the price of oil.
Or to subsidize the price of oil for Ontario and Eastern Canada.
Indeed, yes.
Would you people as university teachers accept the price of oil going to world market level, 80% of the world market in Canada?
Can't commit the CAUT, of course, but I personally believe that it's inevitable that the price has got to go up substantially more than it is now. Well, and if it were to do so, the kind of budgetary problem that Mr. McEachin says he has to meet by cutting social transfers becomes a less serious problem.
You're predicting, therefore, that social transfers will hit not only, or the cutting of them will hit not only universities and, say, medical research, but will also hit Medicare and hospital insurance and the Canada Assistance Plan.
We take the view that the federal government and the provinces signed an agreement in 1977 to say that those funds were untied. And when they're transferred to the province, they become part of the general revenue. The province has got to, therefore, decide if its revenue goes down, what it's going to do. And it can only do two things. It can cut services, and it would have to, I think, cut them across the board, because if it tried to funnel them straight through to the universities, they just collapse, or raise taxes, both of which will be unpalatable, no doubt.
In other words, the provincial governments would have to raise the taxes.
That's right.
They're going to slip out from under, you fear, put it on the back of the provincial government, say we'll give you X transfers, and the balance you can make up yourself.
Indeed, that's exactly what
Do
they
you
want
really
to do.
predict that it would hit hard at university education?
Well, if you just take the cash part of it alone, forget about the tax transfers,
Yeah.
you're talking about 20% of the revenue of British Columbia universities and equivalent organizations. And that's a lot of money. And if it were passed on, you're talking, for instance, in the case of the University of Victoria, just talking cash again, and assuming that the universities make up about 60% of the budget, and the province, you're talking about $14.3 million. Well, the University of Victoria just can't absorb that sort of thing. So that's why we say to the provincial government, and we're gratified to hear from Dr. McGeer and others that, in essence, the provincial government here doesn't disagree that this is a reduction in their general revenues, not a reduction in their university revenues, and that therefore they will have to consider either raising taxes or cutting everything.
You can't make it up with this kind of cut. Well, they wouldn't cut the whole 1.5 billion, would they?
My guess is that the bottom line for the Department of Finance is $1.1 billion.
They'd cut $400 million. Could you make that up with fee increases?
No, you couldn't. The universities would be forced in that direction, but it's just unrealistic to think that they could make up sums of that gigantic nature.
You want the university people across the country to be on the prod with the federal government?
Yes, indeed. We sure do.
Well, one critical question to end with. Are universities not kind of overstaffed, feather-bedded, and searching out students now that the demand is lessening?
No, they're not. If you look at the budgets of BC universities as a percentage of the provincial budget, you will find that they have dropped steadily since 1967, and now about half what they were as a percentage of the provincial budget at that time. And this has meant that all universities, whether in BC or elsewhere in Canada, have had to take really hard decisions about how they were going to
Final
manage their
question,
affairs.
when do you think that McKechnie will make this brutal decision or listen to your pleadings? When?
His original intention was the end of March. He met with some university presidents the day before yesterday, I think, and indicated that they may now be having some second thoughts.
My thanks to Donald Savage, Executive Secretary of the Canadian Association of University Teachers. We'll wait and see what McKechnie mumbles after the break. How much did I pay for this autographed script as a donation to the Variety Club telethon?
$120 Canadian.
Autographed by Jamie Farr, an
That's
original
true.
script.
Yeah.
Well, almost original. I think it's this. We'll take the highest bid on this and pass the money on to the Variety Club.
That's right.
How's that?
That's right.
Must be above 120 Canadian.
That's right. I will take them.
You'll take the bid.
Yeah.
9 a.m. precisely.